This is session 3B, and the topic is on dimensions of well-being at old age. We have 3 presentations. So I think we will have the 3 presentations plus the discussion. Then we'll have the open discussion at the end of the 3 presentations. Yeah. We have a bit more time because session 3A has got 4 presentations, but if we finish early, then we all can move into room 3A. Yeah. So let me start with the first presentation from Alicia De Stefanis on the multidimensional well-being of Asian senior citizens, a systematic review. And Alicia is currently pursuing her master's degree at the Paris School of Economics. She is also working as a research intern at the ADB. And her master's program is under the supervision of Dr. Dil Rahul. Yeah. So, and her presentation will have some comments from Sonia Kim, who is a PhD candidate at the International Public Policy University of Tokyo. So without further ado, I'll invite Alicia to start your presentation.
Yes. I will start sharing my screen. Thanks. Could you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Alima, for introducing me, and thanks to everyone for being here today to listen to this presentation of a paper that I co-wrote with Dr. Raut, which is titled The Multidimensional Well-Being of Asian Senior Citizens, a Systematic Review. I am Alessia De Stefanis. As Alima already said, I am a master's student at the Paris School of Economics, and I've been working as a research intern at the Asian Development Bank Institute under the supervision of Dr. Raut. Sorry, it's blocked. Could you still see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the paper that I am presenting today, it's a systematic review, as already known from the title, and is focusing on elderly's well-being in developing Asia. As you know, a systematic review is not aiming at answering a structured question on causality through econometrics methods, by running some econometrics models, but rather on identifying, selecting, and critically analyzing several relevant literature that has already been written on a specific topic, in this case, elderly's well-being in developing Asia. As you can see from the pie chart that I've reported here, we have selected several different countries in developing Asia. So we have 37% of the countries coming from East Asia, 27 from South Asia, and 24 Southeast Asia. Yet, we have decided to include also other countries. So there is a 12% from other parts of the world. These countries might be developed countries or developing countries. And we have decided to include them in order to have a better comparison with the different methods used for policy, for instance, in different countries, and the different ways that well-being is tackled in other parts of the world. But why we decided to write a systematic review on this topic? Well, as you know, we are living in an aging world. This means that since the 1960s, there has been a huge decline in both fertility and mortality rates in global society. And this has led to have a global population who is rapidly aging. Right now, the age population, so the part of the population that is age 65 years or older, is at the highest level in human history. Yet, the situation is expected to be worsening, if worsening is the right word in this case, in the next decades. Just to provide you some data from the United Nations, while in 2019, we had around 700 million people who were old, so age above 65 years old. In the next 30 decades, so in 2050, we are expecting to have the number of people being projected to double, so reaching 1.5 billion. Of course, each continent has its own peculiarities. So if we compare Asia to Africa, we see that Asia is facing a huge amount of challenges related to elderly people. In particular, the Asian continent and the Asia Pacific countries have been facing an increase in life expectancy. This means that people now live up to more than 70 years, with women reaching an average of 75 years old and men 71 years old. This has been driven by an increase in life expectancy of about 4 years in high-income countries and 6 years on low and medium-income countries compared to the last 20 years. At the same time, we've also noticed a decrease in average fertility compared to 20 years ago. And in particular, now women are having 2.1 children per capita compared to the 2.6 children per woman that we were seeing 20 years ago. So these changes have been producing some significant challenges for Asian developing countries. But why are we talking about challenges? What is this increase in the share of elderly population seen as? Of course, it's sometimes too early to give us a real opinion of what's going on, and there is still ambiguity. But some scholars agree that the increase of the share of elderly people might be seen as harmful for potential economic growth. Indeed, we know that elderly people might be less productive than the youth generation, or they might be unproductive at all as they're out of the labor force. And at the same time, other scholars mentioned the threat that an increase in share of elderly population might cause to public social safety nets systems. First of all, we know that aging bodies are suffering from this so-called limited regenerative biological activities, which simply means that when the human cell in a body gets damaged, when a person is older, well, it takes more time for the body to repair these damaged cells, or the cells might be injured forever, causing then in turn some age-related diseases or disabilities, which might impact then in future the amount of physical and mental well-being the person is having. At the same time, however, aging is not just a biological process. It has a huge socioeconomic facet, which is marked by several things that might happen during the life of this elderly person, such as retirement, so not going to work anymore, not meeting people anymore, not having to wake up and get out of the house every day. Then relocation to new living arrangements, and mainly the death of some beloved one, might there be their spouse, their brothers and sisters. So all these challenges, especially the ones to the public social safety nets, are even bigger for countries where old age support systems are weaker at the moment. If we go back and focus again on the situation of Asia, we really see that some processes are going on. First of all, we know that in previous decades, Asian citizens were really relying on intergenerational support and coexistence, meaning that several people from the same family were living under the same roof. However, new phenomena such as industrialization and internationalization have led to some substantial changes in these family values, and especially in the role of filial piety, meaning that children were not feeling anymore this strong sense of devotion towards their parents as they were feeling previously. And especially industrialization has led to this disruption, if we could say it this way, of traditional family norms and the empathization of new values, new Western values, such as individual achievement rather than family achievement, economic independence for each member of the family, of the household, and the social geographical mobility, meaning that people now would like to move away from rural areas toward urban metropolitan areas. All these new values have also led the family to change the way it's organized, having nuclear families being the most appreciated family structure in Southeast Asia, but the situation is slowly changing also in South and East Asia. So in such a scenario, we really see that the life of elderly has been heavily impacted by all these changes. And as senior citizens cannot rely anymore on the help of their children that much as they were doing before, now they have started seeking help from the state. Well, of course, citizens have been asking help from the state, but Asian economies have been started focusing and coping with an expected issue, and an issue that they were not probably expected to ever face because of this co-resident and intergenerational support that were so strong before. So having to provide well-being to elders has been seen as a complex task by governments, especially in developing countries. And this is linked to the multidimensionality of the concept of well-being, which also gives the title to our systematic review. Indeed, well-being for every individual, might it be a children or an elderly person, is composed by several facets and includes several conditions. And in particular, we have realized that there are three main dimensions, which are the socioeconomic, the physical, and the mental dimension of well-being. And in order to have a complete situation of well-being, the three of them have to be fulfilled. Plus all the indirect links between the three main dimensions, which I will also highlight in the next slides. So starting from socioeconomic well-being, well, the presence of inequalities is what we have really understood as being the central key of socioeconomic well-being in the life of an elderly person. These inequalities might appear at every kind of level, might be gender, social, economic levels. We can think about women having different household tasks or different jobs compared to men. And even if some are more subjective, some are really objective, like the differences in income expenditures, the disparities in the ownership of dwellings or the housing conditions. For instance, having wealthier people, those higher in the socioeconomic background, having indoor toilets or having indoor kitchen in their houses. And at the same time, you also see some disparities in more social facets. So for instance, the role play within the society or the way other people attribute you a status. So all these inequalities and disparities are triggering some negative thoughts in elderly people because they keep comparing themselves to others members of the society, to the neighbors, and this constantly aggravates their individual thoughts, which in turn, of course, lead to precarious mental health condition. And here we see one of the links that we could make in between the socioeconomic dimension and the mental one. Indeed, for instance, the bad living condition can boost deadly diseases, such as depression, because one person is not satisfied of the house is living in. And other feelings such as anxiety, loneliness, the fear of death can really be deadly in some cases. Yet, there are some way to decrease those. And among the most common one, we have the frequent interaction with family members and the surrounding community, and especially the relationship with adult children, regardless of where they live or how far from the house of their parents. And in any case, despite of these more social features, another aspect that can actually improve the mental well-being of an elderly people is the constant participation in leisure activities. This might be chatting with the neighbors, but we have decided to focus on two specific ones, which are religious celebration and outdoor physical exercise. Religious celebration and the participation in those is actually a really ambiguous field because it depends from country to country, from the political feature of the country, and from the religion itself. For instance, some papers were mentioning that Christianity is having more positive impact than other religions. But of course, this depends also on the sample. And outdoor physical exercise, it's also a way to link to the next dimension, which is physical well-being. And in this case, as I mentioned before, at elderly age, people tend to have this decrease in the ability of their body to produce new cells and somehow keep the body working as it was working before. So we have to pay attention to the physical wellness of elderly people and try to reinforce an active lifestyle in them, especially because after the new living arrangements, after retirement, people tend to have a more sedentary life. So there is a really important in the frequency and the type of exercise that has been practiced, especially the intensity of the exercise. With too much intensity could lead to some harmful results. And on the other hand, we know that when a person gets older, we have some typical changes in the BMI, so the body mass index of the person, probably driven by this sedentary life I was mentioning before. And in this case, a healthy diet would be necessary because it would really boost the physical well-being of the individual. And as I have reported in the graph below, from the journal intake compared to the TMREL, we really see that there are some differences in terms of what elderly people assuming in Asia in terms of grams or calories in a daily basis compared to what they should assume. So by reviewing all these papers, we have really seen that there are some improvements made in the policies that were aimed at supporting individuals, for instance, comparing papers from the 1990s to the more recent one from 2020. And yet we really see that there are still some areas, some main areas that require amelioration. And this inequality might have an impact on the life of every citizen, the elderly generation right now, but in the long run, it will impact the life of all the citizens. So if the situation does not promptly change, the challenges are going to be even bigger in the next decades. So what we really suggest is that local policymakers should be identifying and considering the main issues of their countries and prioritize adopt policies at all the levels, may it be local, regional, national, and also international if they wish to cooperate with their neighbors. But yet, what is important is to focus on the word ad hoc, because each policy should be tailored to the feature to of the country and of the citizens. So copy-pasting similar policies that have done in neighboring countries might not work as well as a policy made specifically for a certain country. In any case, we have noticed that there are 4 main barriers to progress, which are pretty common among the developing Asian countries. The first one is the precarious access to public healthcare, especially due to different socioeconomic conditions, meaning that people who are richer might afford paying for a better structure and getting cure in a more productive way, in a better way. And at the same time, regardless of the socioeconomic conditions, so there is a scarcity of medical infrastructure, skilled doctors, and geriatric department. That is really
hello, Alicia.
Yes.
If you could wrap up in maybe a minute or so.
Yes. I'm almost at the end.
All right, thank you.
Then the pension systems, the shortage of infrastructure dedicated to the elderly, and the effect of the double burden of malnutrition, which may have people with different BMIs being not affected as they should by the policies. Our next steps would be using the findings from this systematic review and creating a new AGPI project in collaboration with the Dhaka Institute of Health Economics in Bangladesh. This is a project done by me, Dr. Dilarut and Dean Sonabe. The title is Examining the Well-Being of the Elderly in Bangladesh, and is based at collecting primary data in Bangladesh using a quantitative-based questionnaire. And it will really help examine the problem faced by the elderly in Bangladesh and understanding the factors that are actually influencing their well-being right now. So thank you very much for your attention, and feel free to ask me or Dr. Raut any question also through this contact information that I have reported below. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alicia. So I think we go straight to the discussion. Sonia Kim.
Yes, let me share this screen first.
You have 5 minutes, yeah?
Yep. Can you see my screen? No, not yet.
No.
Sonia, would you like us to share it for you? Do you need any help in sharing your screen?
Yeah. This is not, all right. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Alicia, for a very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed reading papers because it has so many things to learn. So first things first, I'd like to start with going over the paper briefly. So the paper provides a systematic review on elderly's well-being in developing Asia by studying all the relevant research. So as for the methodology, they randomly selected the papers using the content analysis method with the focus on recent publications from 1990 using Google Scholar and JSTOR. So in total, 97 studies were reviewed with a specific focus on Asia. They collect the information and list them by country, method, and significant factors influencing one dimension of elderly's well-being. And among them, there are no studies found in low-income countries. So the authors analyze the current framework on well-being by dividing up the well-being into three different well-beings: society, economic well-being, mental well-being, and physical well-being. So in each dimensions of well-being, the study defines the terminology first, and then introduce the relevant works by raising the issues in Asia countries. For example, gender inequalities in income, housing, and social role are associated with society economic well-being. And mental illness and lack of social interactions influences mental well-being. And last but not least, the physical exercise and malnutrition have an impact on physical well-being. And they study, the study pointed out that there is no sufficient public health care, lack of pension system, and the shortage of infrastructure for elderlies. And they also emphasize their needs to overcome the many challenges left. So to add my comments in the presentation, I personally think that this is a very important study since we are facing a rapid aging global population. And the importance of the elderly's well-being is much bigger, especially in Asian developing countries, because we lack infrastructure supporting elderlies. And among many points, I really like the design of the study because it collects the proper studies and categorize them into each dimension of well-being, which made readers grasp the whole picture in the literature all at once. And they not only put the empirical and theoretical studies together, but link them to emphasize the importance of the study. So, and then I think it has a really strong power to convince the reader by giving additional clear explanation about backgrounds and mechanism with detailed examples. And as for the suggestion, I think that having a clear line, I would say a clear border between each dimension can be considered. Although I understand that there is a link among the well-beings, but for example, in the last part of the mental well-being section, the literature of physical exercise is introduced because it's also related to mental well-being, but it can be like located after putting the physical well-being first, because someone might not have a concrete definition of each terminology. So that would be helpful, even though it's really a minor point. And another point I'd like to suggest is that you can make a coefficient plots by each dimension to see how significant and influential the effect is on each well-being. I once have read some paper, maybe regarding meta-analysis, that using that kind of visualization or graphics will be very useful, both for authors and readers, because this systemic review has a lot of studies. So I also checked the tables in the appendix, listing all the details of the studies, but I could not find what I want to see. So like it does not have to be like forest plots in the meta-analysis, but having that kind of figures might be a great idea for the improvements. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. So I think we will proceed with the second presentation by Dr. Mintam Bui, and she will talk on financial inclusion for the elderly and the role of information and communications technology in Thailand. Dr. Bui comes from Sri Nakarin Wirot University in Bangkok, and she has worked on inequality, gender inequality and women's economic empowerment and entrepreneurship. Her recent interests include time use survey, unpaid care worker, unpaid household service marketization, age, society, and financial inclusion in Thailand and Vietnam. So over to you, Dr. Bui.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, the chair, for giving me the floor. So good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen? Is it full screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
But
go ahead,
Dr. Bui.
Would you mind?
Yeah, I think I'm showing a full screen.
Yeah.
Can you see?
Yes, that's
okay.
Fine.
Thank you. So just let's start. I have only 15 minutes, right?
15 minutes.
It's my pleasure today to present my work on financial inclusion for the elderly in Thailand and the role of ICT. Let's just start with the motivation of this study. So we all know that there's a huge literature on the financial inclusion and its positive effect on economic development, as well as poverty reduction and the role in promoting inclusive growth. So in Thailand, if we briefly look at the financial inclusion, then there's a big report we call the Global Financial Index, right? Conducted by the World Bank worldwide, more than 100 countries, and the ranking of Thailand is among the top in Asia Pacific, and it's show that like 80% have the financial asset to financial service. Also, the Bank of Thailand also cited a quite high number, 97% of the household can get access to financial service in Thailand. So we can say that in Thailand we have a quite of inclusive financial services, and we also do not have a significant gender disparity in terms of financial inclusion. So what is the problem here is that we want to find exactly who is then excluded from the financial services, and according to the latest World Bank report, the quality of the service is still poor, and the share of the people using digital banking, like a mobile banking is still quite low in Thailand. At the same time, we see that Thailand aging is very fast. We became the aging society in 2005, and it's forecast that we will be like a super age society in the next 20 years. And we all know about the role of financial service in aging society, whether it's a pension scheme, it's the receiving the allowance from the government, or even it's for our daily life of the elderly. So there's also a significant point that we just noted in the case of Thailand. We have an increasing share of the elderly living independently alone or with their spouse instead of with the children. So it means that in the future, they should be kind of independent in conducting their own financial services and financial transactions. At the same time, we look at the literature and for my to the best of my knowledge, I found no study on the elderly in particular, even though we have quite a lot of study on the household level, right? The Bank of Thailand conducted every 3 years, I think. We also see the significant difference between the younger generation and the elderly in terms of get access to the internet using computers and other types of social media. So that is the starting point of the research. So the objective of my study is we want to examine the different level of financial inclusion at different age group in Thailand in order to determine the important factor for the financial inclusion among the old age. So thereby we can kind of suggesting some maybe meaningful policy implication, how to improve the financial inclusion for the elderly. So let me just preview the result just in case that I cannot finish it in time. So you still know the main finding of this report. Actually, I used like a 2 data set in this paper. The first one, as I mentioned, the Global Financial Index, right? Or we call the FINDEX, with the latest survey in 2017. And actually we found something that we have a very small, I mean, in Thailand, there's a small number of people who have the mobile money account, right? And most of them, 80% have the mobile phone already, right? And similarly, we found no significant gender difference in terms of financial score. I will explain what does it mean financial score here, but there's no gender disparity significant. The labor force participation have been a quite a significant and important contribution to the financial score of different individuals. So being active, being working after the old age it seems to be a point that contributes to financial inclusion. And the important thing is that we see a big gender difference in terms of labor force participation among the old age. And lastly, we found a very strong negative correlation between financial score and the age, whether it's the numerical age as the numerical variable or whether it's a dummy variable. I'm going to show you the model, but this is the key result. And then we cross-check those results with what we call the ICT survey in Thailand in about the same year, 2016, sorry. To kind of verify the result that we found from the first set of data. And then we found a very low interest access among the older person. But once the older person became an internet user, there's a high likelihood that they will become the mobile banking user as well. So it's more or less like a younger generation once they are the internet user. So that is a policy point that we can develop. And the main reason that many elderly do not use internet just because they don't know how to use and they do not see the necessity to use that. There's a big gender bias and also the residential area bias between rural and urban in internet access. So that is the point that we may have to notice when we choose different target group. So for the last point I want to mention in our finding is that the elderly people, they still use the feature phone, not the smartphone like we are using. So it means that using the application in the mobile banking service is quite difficult with that one. Even that one can access to the internet, but the feature phone, as you know, that is not convenient. So that is the main result of my study. So let me briefly look at the walk you through the some point of financial inclusion in Thailand. I just skip on the literature review, but I think it's useful to mention some point in the case of Thailand that we have a high financial high access to the financial services, either from international study or from the Bank of Thailand study. So it's like a 55 to 50, sorry, 95 to 97%. But over years, and we have a small increase in the use of electronic payments. And in terms of ICT use, then we have a big difference between gender and between the rural and urban areas. So you can see some number here and to see the difference between different segments of the society. This image just briefly tell you what's going on in Thailand today, that we are using the electronic payment we call the PromptPay QR code, which were actually kicked off in 2018, but widely used among people in 2019 and now today. But this is the period, this is the system after the data period that I'm using in my study. So it's good to maybe later on continue with the new data set and see what would be the change after the government introduced this system into that. But for now, just go back to 2017 and see what is the result. For the methodology, then we have two data sets, as I mentioned, right? The Global Financial Index have quite a good information with some questions as I list here that we may to calculate the financial inclusion of different people. I use only the data set in 2017, even though they have 2 rounds before that. And the other one is the National Representative Survey of the ICT of people in Thailand. And we also limit the sample to the respondent, the age 15 and above, to match it with the Global Index. So this is the methodology that I use to construct the financial inclusion, which is the core of the research. So I base on the framework by OECD, the International Network of Financial Education in 2016. They have many different indicators, but basically they have 2 components of the index, which is the the criteria for holding financial products and the active use or consumption of financial products. So even though you have many, but given our data set, then I can see only 5 questions, which is related to those indicators, but it is available from the Findex data set about the having an account, whether you save or not, whether you borrow or not, whether you rely on the financial resources from relatives and friends, and whether you receive or sending remittances. So with these 5 questions we have, it's like a yes or no, and we classify it's like a dummy variable 0 and 1, and in order to calculate the sum of the score, right? So the score is like between 0 and 5. Okay. And then we follow, we also normalize the score that we have from 0 to 5 to is kind of standardized and normalized following the Morgan and DBI as well. And then we use this score, right, to run an econometric model. We have 2 group of model. One is basic, is extended, right? I'm going to explain that. So let's jump into some result from the descriptive analysis that I use the data from the Findex, the global Findex, right? So, so you may know that for each country, they select only 1,000 respondents in their sample survey. And in Thailand, we have more than 800 that people have an account. And most of it is from almost all of it from the financial institution. So the part of informal sector is quite very small, but only 7% among 1,000 have a mobile money account. And among the ones who are excluded from accessing to the financial service, 188 respondents, about half are the elderly with the age 55 or above, or even you look at the older group, 60, then it's about 1/3 of those who are not included with the account. Then this graph show you something interesting, that if you look at the orange one, so it show you the percentage of having an account. So it's quite similar across the age group. Only the oldest one, 70 years old, have a smaller. And then the blue ones show you the percentage of people owning a mobile phone, right? So again, we have the lower rate within the the older group. And the gray one, which is low here, then it is the account of mobile money, the percent of people having mobile money account by different age group, and it's quite high among the younger generation, but it's quite low, right? Like you even cannot see from the graph, right? The gray one for the elderly, right? And then we also calculate what is the percentage of people having mobile money account within the group of the one who have mobile phone. Right? So you see in this case that there are some 1% or 0.6% among the elderly. So there exists, but not very much. Then we look at some factors that may affect the score, right? So it can be a gender, and it can be a labor participation, it can be education, it can be income, right? And also we include whether they have a mobile banking and internet banking. And I have some statistics with that, but we are going to include that into the regression, so you may have a better idea of that. This graph shows you what is the most frequent financial transactions that the elderly always conducted. So mostly to receive the government transfer, about 64%, right? The other two is to withdraw the money from the account or deposit the money from the account, apart from the other services as well. We have many other tables to look at that, whether they use a formal channel or informal channel as well, and how they use that with different kind of services. Right? So let me just jump through on this table to tell you the result of the financial inclusion score, right? The score that I mentioned, the way that we calculate it, and it ranked from 0 to 5. So we categorize it by different criteria, right? By gender, by education level, by income quintile, whether the people participate in the labor force or not, and then lastly by the age group. So basically, if you look at the mean, the second column, right? And then you will see that by the age group, then the score reduced by age. As people become older, then the score become much smaller, except the younger generation, they are still the children. So they may not use the financial service a lot. And these graphs show you the correlation between the financial score that we calculate. It's still ranking from 0 to 5, and with the age, and it's so a strong negative correlation between the two variables. And even when we standardize and normalize it, and we see it's kind of the normal distribution here for the financial score, or the Z-score. Then let me show you the third part of the analysis is to the econometric model, right? Where we use the financial score as financial inclusion score with some basic socio-economic characteristic here. So we have gender. We see no gender difference as we forecast before from the quality descriptive result. Education and income has quite a strong positive, right? And even labor force participation here. So the more interesting thing is the second half of the table. I cannot show you the whole things, but here you see that we have different model. Where the first one, we use the age as the numerical number, the second one as the age group, and the third and the fourth as the dummy variable, where you use the different cutoff of the age, 55 or 60, and we see that in all, then we see a negative coefficient and strongly significant one. For example, like the last one, we see that people who are like the elderly, right, 60 and above, right, by definition in Thailand, then their financial score reduced by 25 points, right? So we extend the model by including some variable like the mobile phone and mobile money account, and see if there's a difference. So the first part is still the characteristic that we already mentioned, but now look at the things that we have here. So now I keep only the dummy variable for the elder person age 60 and above, right? And we still have the negative coefficient across all the model. But the difference between this model is that the first one I include only the mobile phone as a dummy. And you see that it has a positive effect. It's like a 50 point, right? The second one is the mobile money account. So similar kind of the magnitude is quite the same, but surprisingly that when we add both, we also have still kind of similar coefficient. It means that there's kind of additive effect between the two mobile phone and mobile money account in affecting the financial score of the people in Thailand. But when we interact the two terms, we cannot see the different effect, the significant effect. So there is no multiplicative effect in this case. Then the fourth part of my analysis, hopefully this is the one we have time.
Dr. Bui, if you could wrap up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think I wrap up in about 2 or 3 minutes. Can I? So like I mentioned to you, we use the ICT survey, right? And the blue one show you the internet, the share of internet user, but the orange one is within the internet user, how many actually use the money banking and mobile banking. And you can see that even with the elderly, they have a similar rate, like in the young generation. So this is the good point to say that even that the elderly, but if they can use the internet, then they can use the mobile phone banking service. And we also test for the difference between women and men in rural and urban area, and we see a big difference in using internet. We also see that how much where is people use the internet, especially for the elder group, right? Then mostly at home, but once they retire from work, and then you see that the percentage from work reduced from 75% to like 70% only. And the thing here is that the role of ICT community center, like we have in Thailand, does not show a strong influence here that elderly people use the ICT communication center. We also look at the reason why people do not use that. And I told you before, right? We look at the type of phone that they use that. Then as I told you before, right, at the beginning, that among the one who use the feature phone, who cannot use, I mean, the one who are not allowed you to use the application, then in this case, a lot are the elderly. So let me jump up to the conclusion with some finding. I think I already provided to you, but what we can draw from this finding is that if the government somehow can even actually provide the device, the smartphone for the elderly, and teach them how to use that, how to access to the internet, then that would be a good thing. Then the role of financial literacy is important here. And with regard to the policy that whether we should provide the device for the elderly so that it's consistent, so it's easier for you to provide the training to them, then we did that in the past in Thailand, where we provide some kind of tablet for the school kids, right? So I think it's kind of possible. But the things here that we also have a lot of education and training need to provide to the elderly, and that need to be provided by the financial institution, somehow like the custom-made financial product for the elderly, easier to use that. So we can see that in the overall picture is that we need the partnership between the private and the public sector in order to provide a good financial service and increasing the financial inclusion among the elderly. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Bui. So let's now hear from Alicia, who will say a few words on your presentation. So go ahead, Alicia.
Yes, I will share my screen now.
Stop the share.
Could you see my screen?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you.
So thank you, everyone, and thank Mintan Bui for this very interesting speech. Right now, I'm going to discuss the paper that has just been presented. So I would like to start by summing up the paper in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page. The author starts mentioning some current challenges in developing Asia that can actually be reduced by a development of strong financial system, which could promote inclusive growth and could reduce poverty. In particular, she's highlighting the case of Thailand, which is the 5th country among the top quintile countries in terms of financial inclusion in Asia Pacific. And this is very interesting because Thailand could be really used as a front-end benchmark for the region, because the neighboring countries could compare themselves to Thailand rather than some high-income countries. In Thailand, we have financial inclusion as over 80% of the population has a bank account, and half of them are older than 55 years old, while 1/3 of them, a bit more than 1/3, are older than 65 years old, meaning that they are defined as elderly. Thai elderly people are actually characterized by limited access to financial services and a low level of financial inclusivity. And what is very interesting to be noticed is the fact that there is a limited use of a mobile phone for financial transactions, so basically e-banking. Given this scenario, what the author did is using two different data sets. From the first one, she extrapolated a measure of financial inclusion, FI, which range from 0 to 5, and the data were standardized. And this financial inclusion score was used as a dependent variable for an econometric model based on OLS with different specification. And the main result that she got is that there is a positive association of financial inclusion with labor force participation, income level, and education level. But the relationship is negative, the association is negative with age and age group, meaning that as the person gets older, apparently the financial inclusion decreases. These results also show a strong correlation between owning a mobile phone and having a mobile phone for using money accounts. The second data set instead show a limited access to internet and low utilization of ICT device, also after controlling for socioeconomic and demographic factors, this limited use of banking, but yet we saw that if an individual is an internet user, then the elderly is more likely to use this e-banking function more than a young person. This being said, I have some positive comments to share with you because I really enjoyed this paper. I think it's very interesting and a real challenge. I really appreciated the goal, the fact that the author really seems to understand that there was a gap in the literature. So there were no papers about the financial inclusion of elderly people at the individual level, because we had some household, but understanding the financial inclusion of elderly through household data is difficult. I really enjoyed the utility. I appreciate that because financial transactions are very important for the life of everyone, elderly, youth, but having a project on that and sharing the results could really help designing and implementing some policies that will lead to higher inclusion, and they can be used from different stakeholders for different studies. I appreciate the fact that Mintam always tries to provide explanation, not just showing the results and the data. For instance, at the very end, she explained that the fact that we don't use, elderly people don't use internet banking, not because they're not interested or they don't find the necessity, but rather because of these underdeveloped skills. So it shows that policy could intervene and change something. And I've appreciated this suggestion. So the fact, for instance, that Thailand should have cheaper internet fees, higher financial literacy, etc. At the end, I would like to suggest some improvements that are just some personal thoughts that I thought while reading the paper is just something subjective. I would like to suggest that given the data set that the author has been using, maybe some more control variables could have been used. I would have been interested to know what are the results by taking into account the marital status, number of children, the relationship with children, because we know that elderly people really rely on their children for the use of internet devices, mobile phones, etc. I would have suggested also mentioning directly the list of variables using the model, like in the very first chapter, just to make the reader know what they could expect. For instance, there are some rural versus urban comparison later on, but maybe the reader does not know at the end that this will be done, but I understand sometimes we see some results and then we want to prove other things, but just for clarity, I don't know, it was something that came to my mind. I would suggest adding some more interaction variables because sometimes there apparently are some variables that might be moving together. We don't know, like labor force participation, gender, age, and it would be interesting to see how they are actually interacting with each other, if that's the case, of course. And at the end, I would like to remind everyone that according to me, there is a bit of always ambiguity in terms of the relation of having a mobile phone and having internet banking among elderlies, regardless of the region where this person is coming from, because the generation of elderly right now has not grown up with internet and with mobile phones. So sometimes they're just having a mobile phone for calling their kids, but they just know how to use one button and that's it. So I think it's something that we always have to keep into account. But again, this is just something subjective that I thought while reading the paper. And in any case, it was a really good paper that I would strongly recommend to everyone who is interested in the topics. Thanks.
Thank you, Alicia,
Alicia.
for your comments.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alicia. I think we move on to the third presentation first, and then we'll have the open discussion at the end of the third paper. So third presentation is by Sonia Kim, who is currently doing her PhD at the University of Tokyo. And she's also at the Fox International Fellow at Yale University. And as a discussant, it will be Dr. Bui. So I do not need to introduce Dr. Bui anymore. So over to you, Soyoung. We can see your screen. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Today, I'm Sonia Kim from University of Tokyo. Thank you for joining the session. Today, I'm going to talk about our paper on the role of structural transformation in demographic change. So basically, the aim of our paper is to explore the demographic transition of the population through the transformation of industrial structure. So since we really are at preliminary stage, any comments and suggestions will be appreciated. So the questions we address are: how's the former agrarian villages been transformed in the last 40 years in the Philippines? And what's the role of the enhanced connectivity and industrialization on demographic change of population? And specifically, we investigate how the occupational of the eldest child affect the parents' survival rate. So in our framework, we use infrastructure investments and industrialization as our treatment variables, which are openings of the highway called SLEX and industrial parks nearby. And we estimate the impact on parents' survival rates measured by whether they are alive or not during the survey period. And we use combined data sets. First, our original long-term household data and satellite imageries for land use in the region, and the administrative data about school opening with geospatial information. And throughout the study, we found that higher exposure to newly constructed highway and industrial assets has led to extended longevity of the male heads with the eldest child whose primary occupation is manufacturing. So this suggests that the structural transformation affects not only directly to the younger generation through the occupational choice, but indirectly to their parents' generation through the resource transfer or better cares by children's generation. So structural transformation and demographic changes are two fundamental issues on economic development. And as many papers explored, structural transformation is one of the key drivers of successful long-term economic development. And as income goes up, we can see that most of the high-income countries experience demographic transition in both fertility and mortality from high level to low level. So in Agile et al. Investigates the causal link between earnings opportunity in agriculture and fertility. And they found that households switching to manufacturing actually show the declines in fertility because of the higher opportunity costs of raising children. But no study has examined the nexus between structural transformation and demographic changes using microdata. So with our dynasty level panel data, we'd like to bridge this gap in the literature by examining not only the fertility decision of the affected generation, but the longevity of their parents, parental generation. So the area we study is Laguna province, located to the south of Manila. And as you can see, the center of this map, there is this large water body called Lake Laguna. So back in 1976, the west and the east side of the lake show the fairly even distributed development. So you can compare the proportion of red built-up area on the bottom of the lake between east and west. So these are the satellite imageries from Landsat data controlling for seasonal variation. So before the highway was connected to the capital, they appeared to have quite a similar proportion of red built-up area between east and west side of lakes. But since the opening of highways and industrial parks, you can see the increase in built-up area in the west side of the lakes. So this unique environment of Laguna province allowed us to study the impact of modernization in the same province. This is the South Luzon Expressway, SLEX. So basically, the existing A to B was extended to B to C in 1978. And also, the industrial parks have emerged in this area, especially on the west side of the Lake Laguna. And I show these industrial parks on the map with blue dots. So you can see that all the industrial parks are located in the west and the south side of the lake. And to define the treatment zone, we considered how much each village is modernized using the proximity to infrastructure. So treatment is defined as year and zone specific exposure to modernization at village level, capturing construction of a highway and opening of industrial parks. And we regarded those who were below 10 in 1977 as a treatment group because they were exposed to the treatment itself, and they were under the decision of on schooling and labor market in 1977. So with this setting, we adopt difference in difference framework. And for checking the baseline balance and parallel trend, we have checked the proportion of built-up area between treatment and control zone. So as shown in the red circle, the proportion of built-up area was not so different between two zones just before the highway opening, and the gap was gradually enlarged as time goes by. And we also showed the parallel trends in population growth before 1980s, which ensures the internal validity of the ID model. And to explain a bit about our original data, we tracked the original survey called the Laguna Multipurpose Household Surveys, which has been done in Laguna province in 1975. And the original 34 villages were selected by stratified random sampling based on 4 categories representing society economic condition of entire Laguna province. So 2017, we tracked all the descendants of the available households from the original 322 households. And for the analysis, we restricted the sample to the age to individuals whose age is below 20 and above 80. They were trimmed. So the age below 20 and above 80 was trimmed to include those who finished their education. And then all the spouses were excluded because they were more likely to have entered the household after finish their schooling. So this sampling results in our study sample with almost 8,400 individuals in 4,200 households with 318 dynasties. So this diagram illustrates how the survey and sample are constructed. And as you can see, more than half of the sample stays in the original village, and over 75% stays in the original municipality. Okay.
Hello. For those who are not presenting, if you could mute your mic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the structure of the survey samples show that one dynasty family tree have 4 or 5 generations from the original household head. This descriptive statistics. Here we restrict our samples to father and the eldest child to get rid of any possible confounding factors related to birth order. So from these 4 figures, I want you to focus on the difference in the slope between agriculture and manufacturing. And unlike agriculture, it's almost flat and close to 0 for manufacturing, like from father's age 40 to 70. And manufacturing and traditional services show the almost the same shape. But in the next slide, you can see the difference. This is the one, I put them all together in one graph. And the father with the eldest child working in manufacturing actually live longer than with a child working in any other sectors. And another attempt here is to only focus on the fathers whose lifetime primary occupation is agriculture. So what we're trying to do here is that we mitigate the expected intergeneration effect in children's occupational choice and exclude the pathway that the father's occupation affect his own survival rate. And interestingly enough, we still see the difference in longevity between manufacturing and other sectors, although the overall survival rate is smaller than the one before. And the main analysis, now we postulate the following linear probability model for father's survival function. So as I was saying, we combine our analysis to the industry-specific subsamples. The father engaged in agriculture and the eldest children work in sector M, agriculture, manufacturing, or traditional services sector. So S is representing survivor status of father of individual I in family tree H of village J and born in cohort T. And AT takes 1 if the individual is in the younger cohort in 2017. And DJ is a modernization of treatment indicator. And Z is a vector of control variables. So the parameter of interest is theta here. Theta. Okay, and in order to minimize the possible selection bias from migration, we also estimate we estimate the equation by residential location of the household. So subsample A, those living in the original village or family tree. Subsample B, as living in the original municipality, and the subsample C includes those living outside of subsample A and B has a household remaining in the same village and municipality. So this is the main result of our analysis. So what we can see here is the significant positive treatment effect of newly constructed highway and industrial estates on extended longevity of the male heads. So in column 3, the point estimate indicates that the fathers of the treated individuals are 27% points more likely to survive at the time of our survey. So we control for the age of the individuals and fathers themselves. We also see slightly larger coefficient in column 7, which is focusing on the individual living in the original municipality. But this pattern is not observed in column 11 because individuals living outside of original municipalities are not likely to be influenced by the treatment status. So this result strengthens our finding of a positive impact of a structure transformation on earlier generation longevity. So just to recap, what we have found through the study is that significant and economically large impacts of the children's exposure to modernization and resulting engagement to the manufacturing jobs on their father's longevity. So since we focus on the children's exposure, the effect is not through the changes of their own occupation, but expanded resource transfer to their parents or improved elderly care by their children. So this finding suggests that structural transformation influences the demographic of various generations. And it directly affects the exposed generation through the occupational choice or income effect, and indirectly through the fertility decision of exposed generation on their older generation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So now I would like to invite Dr. Bui to give some comments. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Can you see my screen now with the comments? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Put it on slideshow.
Yes, just a moment. Oops. Okay, I think it's good now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, I would say that thank you for giving me the chance to read and comment on your paper. I really enjoy it, and I read it. It's like a story, like enjoy it line by line, and then I'm so impressed with the map that you present as well. Because it's like you need to go back to history, like in 1970 something, to track on the respondent of the survey at that time. So first of all, I just summarized what the main component of your study here. So the objective is that you want to investigate how the connectivity, in this case the infrastructure, right, saying about the express highway and actually also the industrial estate, if I understand it right, that you mean the infrastructure, that means both things, and see how it changed the demographic trend within the population of the treatment and the control population group. And your data is I mean, the strongest point of the study, because it's quite unique, right? It's a 40-year-long kind of data that you have to track it, and I really kind of I found it fascinating that you have done a lot of work on tracking back the data, right, from the present moment 2017 back to 40 years ago. So the finding is you have like a two finding, but I actually want to separate it in like a two part, right? One is that you found that the extended longevity of the male head of the household somehow affected by the occupational choice of the oldest kid, right? The oldest son or daughter in this family, and And the part that I separated is like it's more like your explanation that why we can have those results, right? And you try to explain that it is like an indirect effect, right? Through maybe the income resources from the earning of the children, and then it transferred to the parents, and then it turned into a good outcome of a better longevity for the elder parents. So I will not present some summary because I think you did it much better than I do. So the point I want to kind of highlight here is that you have an excellent and unique data set, right? And there's a good map that you provide. And the tracking protocol, I read it very carefully, and then I saw it and I found it's very sophisticated and also very thorough and very careful, that you have the way that you trace back to the original dynasty. And you use the different framework here, right? So basically you have the villages, right? The villages or the Bangladesh, right? The Bangladesh on the west side as the treatment group and the east side as the control group, right? So this is the part that I kind of find it kind of troublesome to me, that we know that whenever we do some kind of impact evaluation, then the selection of a treatment and control group is always very tricky, right? And even here that you said that the treatment is some kind of year specific and zone specific, right? Exposure to the modernization. So it means that there is some villages which will be treatment in some year and then non-treatment in the other year, or not. I cannot find the answer from the paper. Whether you may have some kind of table to specify that in which different year that you have the treatment and the control group differently. The intervention here you have is the highway and the industrial estate, right? So do you combine this as the two criteria, which is compulsory, in order to define it as the treatment group, or just one of that is fine? Because that some villages later on the east side, right, they also get access to the industrial estate in like the 1990s or something, like the San Antonio 1 and 2. I see they are quite close to the industrial zone as well. So I thought that the research should be, I mean, easier to read for the people and also have more impact if we can explore something like, when you mentioned something like a demographic change, right? So here actually you look at longevity only, or both longevity and fertility, because you mentioned about fertility of the literature, but what I found from your report is like only the graph of the population growth, right? But you actually have not shown, maybe you already run, but you have not shown the econometric model relating to fertility. So that is the point that you can combine. And the other things that trouble me the most is that how can you kind of explain and based on what kind of theoretical foundation that you can link the transformation in terms of economic transformation into the longevity, because it may be by other factors as well rather than the infrastructure. Probably, for example, here you mentioned about the education and school availability, but what about the healthcare facility? Healthcare facility around that area? I'm not sure that you have the data or not, but if the healthcare facility become more accessible to the elderly in the treatment zone compared to the control areas, then that should be the factor as well, right? So I think there's need more analysis and explanation to understand the linkage between transformation to longevity. Here we see through your result is, for me, it's like more like a correlation than causation. So, and why do you need at the male household? I mean, male-headed household only? There's a small number of female, I guess, So that does not allow you to look at the female household headed by the female. So that would be some gender aspect here, but I'm not sure about the data. So just stop at that point. Then the information on schooling, right? I would say that it's whether it should be a control factor or you will include it as the treatment variable as well. I'm quite confused when reading the paper, because I think you should control that the availability of schools should be the same in two area, or you think that the availability of school can bring better human resources to the worker there so that they can work better and select a better choice of the occupation. And the school availability may be a different outcome of other development policy as well. For example, the education policy of the Philippine government, rather than the transformation of the highway and the industrial estate. So it's hard in this case to separate, to netting out the effect of the things. So healthcare facility, as I mentioned. Okay, so I will mention some point about the Antonio part that I'm confused whether it should be or not. And the last point that I want to mention, and you also, I think you addressed part of that in terms of migration, right? When we say about the share of workers in one zone compared to the other zone, right? Then whether it is because of transformation or then people make different choice, or because of migration, because people simply from the poorer zone, they do not have a lot of industrial estates, so they move to Manila or they move to other more developed provinces in order to work there. So that's why the remaining part of the population in their old towns mostly is in agriculture. So that is the point that I'm also kind of concerned. Then the mobility and internal migration is actually the disruption in your study. So so that's why I mentioned that whether it's the share change because of migration or because of the sectoral shift because of transformation. So that is just some basic thinking. Then I would love to read your papers again, because I can see a huge potential in that and a lot of new horizontal for us to explore if you may want. Probably in terms of migration, whether people want to stay in that province so that they can take care more of their parents, so that they have a longer longevity as well. So again, I think you have the data set of the household as well, right? So probably not the oldest son is the determinant factor on the longevity of the parents. But probably if they have a lot of siblings, then that is the one who take care of the parent rather than the first one. So I think I should stop now for 5 minutes. So, but if we have chance, we can further discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bui. Okay, before we have the open discussion, and before people start leaving the room to the other room, can we switch on all our cameras? The Secretariat would like to take a photo. So is any of the, so are we able to do it now? And then we'll continue with open discussion. Because once open discussion, then, you know, people start leaving. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, ready? We will
All
take a photo now. We request
Okay.
only the presenters and discussants of this panel to turn on their cameras, please. Okay. Okay, so ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much. You can turn off your cameras now. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll come back to the open discussion. Just now I saw one chat that actually giving a suggestion to to Dr. Bui.
Okay.
And it says that this is for you to think about. Having a mobile phone and internet banking could be risk regarding using OLS. So it is necessary to test the classical assumptions or using logic if it look at the probability that people of all ages, including the elderly who use the internet, will also use mobile banking. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. That is actually an interesting question that I was quite concerned during the research, because that I guess that you want to mention about the endogeneity between the two variables, right? Whether having a mobile phone and having internet banking, right? That should be some kind of two-way or bi-directional effects or not. If we in our regression, then we run it with the Findex data, and that Findex data does not classify or specify whether it's a feature phone or a smartphone. Right? We know that with the feature phone, we normally just can do some basic function like a calling or texting or something, right? But not like the smartphone. So that is the data that we wish to have in the Findex data, where we calculate the financial index, the financial inclusion score. So that's why in the second part, using the ICT youth survey, then we have those information. But I haven't bring those information into the explanation of that. So that is the good point that you mentioned, that somehow we should kind of link between the two information. And I also think about using some kind of instrumental variable as well, because definitely when you have the mobile phone and you have the internet banking, that sounds very correlated, because maybe people not just use internet from the computers to access to the internet. So that is the point of further study. Thank you very much.
Dr. Bui, I have a question or some
yes, please.
One clarification. No. I'm not sure whether in your study you have included financial abuse among the elderly with respect to, because when you talk about financial inclusion, so I don't know whether you would consider looking at, because in Malaysia there have been concerns like, the banks are saying that are older people feel that they are not being treated, whether they have issues and challenges when they actually go to the bank, to open an account and all that, whether there is such, discrimination against them, or also, on financial abuse, like, because now you have a lot of scams and all that, is, and people have lost, huge sums of money because they are elderly and they don't know much information about, protecting themselves. So, what is your opinion on that?
Yes, sure. I totally agree with your point that it's critically important to look at the other side of financial inclusion as well. Because for the elderly, if they are not kind of independent in conducting their transaction, then they have to rely on other person, whether it's a relative or whether someone else, right? And when you go to the bank, you may have this kind of treatment, right? So that is the point that actually we have the information from the elder survey in Thailand, which is another part of the survey, which is not linked with the Findex data of the global scale and also the ICT. But I think we can extract some kind of descriptive information from that and then add into the study. And the problem that you raised, like a scam and all sort of thing, is critically important this day, because just a few months ago in Thailand, we have the case like the elder mother have a lot of money, and even their daughter tried to scam and take out the money from that without the notice from the mother. So here is even saying that being independent in conducting the financial service. Even you cannot move to the bank, right? So it even highlight the importance of mobile banking and e-banking, because the elderly can just stay at home and click in the mobile phone, and then they can conduct it with higher level of security than they have to travel to the branches and then conducting the service. So thank you for the point that you have raised, and I think definitely that would be another aspect of financial inclusion that we need to take into account when we make some policy as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There is a question here, maybe more targeted to Alicia. What are the most important factors that influence to promote positive well-being for older persons?
Well, I would say that each dimension that I have mentioned, so the socioeconomic, the mental, and the physical well-being are important, and each of them should be boosted somehow. But out of all the literature that me and Dr. Raoult have been reading, I think that the relationship with children is something that can really promote the well-being of a person in all these aspects. Because while the mental issues, the physical issues have somehow always been there for an elderly person, the way that he has reacted after the new changes in values given by industrialization, internalization, and the way that he, as a relationship with his children is something that is more new and has changed. So many children are going away, they are leaving their elderly parents, they're maybe contacting them just a few times a week, and this is really something that Asian elderly parents are really struggling with. So I think that all the things that could turn around the way that a parent is approaching his children, and also on the other way, is really something that can improve the well-being of the person. But of course, we have to take into account health infrastructures, the pension system, the way that elderly are financing themselves. Everything is important, but I believe that good relationship and having just the possibility of talking with children and feeling them close to each other is important and can really provide some help nowadays.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? So if not, then we can wrap up this session and come back to join the main for the keynote address, keynote speech 2 afterwards at 3:30. So before we adjourn, can we show our appreciation to all the speakers and the discussants? It has been an interesting session. And
thank you very much, Professor.
Yeah. So thank you
for sharing.
So we'll see you back for the keynote speech. Yeah. So thank you. Bye bye for now.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.